Well, thanks for showing up for lunch. I'm happy to be here. Unfortunately, Nicole had a very important meeting that came up. She's got a meeting about the National Register nomination for the Luna 1555, 1559 Luna Settlement Site and Shipwrecks. They're actually, Dr. Judy Bentz is working on getting that listed as a National Register of Historic Places District, a historic district. And so she had to attend a meeting with Judy about that, so it's all connected. It all connects right back to this. So I'll just be doing this solo today, but I'll talk about our children's chapter book that we call Luna the Cat. We actually wrote it several years ago, but we published it just last summer, in June of 2025. And so if you're interested in getting this book, I didn't bring any to sell myself because the Historic Trust, UW Historic Trust, actually sells the book in their gift shop. So you can buy it at the Pensacola History Museum, in their gift shop there. You can buy it at the Tivoli House. You can buy it there, or the Pensacola Children's Museum also carries it. So if you're interested, you can go get it there. There's other places too that sell it as well. But basically what I'm going to do with this talk is I'm going to give a little bit of background about a little bit of background about ourselves and why we chose to write this. But then also we're going to go briefly, hopefully, over the history and the actual history and archaeology of the 1559 to 1561 Luna settlement sites and shipwrecks, and how we use that real history and real archaeology to write this children's chapter book to engage younger audiences with history and archaeology, but teach them actual history and archaeology, but of course it's fictional. All right, so let's start off with I'll talk about myself. So, of course, my name is Thomin. I was trained as actually a maritime historian. I have my undergraduate and master's degree actually in history, public history. But mostly I focused on maritime history. I've been doing public archaeology now for almost 20 years. So I started in 2007 doing public archaeology, and here I still am doing public archaeology. For my regular day job, I am a senior faculty research associate with the University of West Florida, but I'm also for the Florida Public Archaeology Network. I've been with them now for most of the existence of that FAN, so 15 years. And my current job title is our Director of Education and Interpretation for our entire coordinating center. So we're a statewide program with the University of West Florida. Our main office is just across the street, across Main Street, at 207 East Main Street. But that's our coordinating center for the entire program. So while we're a University of West Florida program, we're actually statewide. We have offices across the state. If you're interested in coming over across the street, or at another time, we do have a museum exhibit that's open. Won't be open over spring break, but it's generally open and free to the public. You can just check the website for hours for that. But I've been doing public archaeology and public programs for adults and kids for a long time. All right, so Nicole, she is an underwater archaeologist by training. She's also been doing public archaeology for over a decade now, probably longer than that, at least 15 years. She is a researcher. She's currently the assistant director at the UWS Archaeology Institute, which is on the main campus of UWS. So if you want to see some of the artifacts that you're going to see in this presentation, you can go to the Pensacola History Museum and see some of them there, but you can also go to the main campus where Nicole works at, the Archaeology Institute, and they have a museum that you can go, and it's again, free and open to the public, Monday through Friday, I think 9 to 4, something like that, or hours. Just check online, you'll find that information. But again, her background is in maritime underwater archaeology. My background is as a historian. And we've both been doing public archaeology for a combined total of like 25 years. So one time did you combine? No, more than that, 35, something like that. All right, so Nicole and I actually used to work together. Our offices were literally connected with a door, and so we would work on do the programs for a really long time. And so our experience with doing kids programs, exhibit development for museum exhibits, archaeological training, whether it was doing heritage awareness diving training for divers, or whether it was doing cemetery resource protection workshops. So we did a lot of things over the years, but through this experience, one thing that we kept coming across was that sometimes it's very difficult to engage younger audiences with this information. Archaeologists or scientists will so by nature they tend to speak in jargon, which is very difficult even for adults to understand sometimes, but especially for younger kids. And we always noticed that that was always a difficult thing sometimes, was to bridge those, history and archaeology with the younger audiences and make it engaging and enjoyable. And so that's kind of where the idea where this book originated, is that we were doing programming, and we realized there was this kind of lack of children's chapter books for younger kids, so 8 to 12 is really what the book was designed for, that were written by actual historians and archaeologists. You can find other books for kids this age that talk about archaeology, but it was more focused on the process, which is important, but it's not something that kids generally attach to, especially at a younger age. So we thought, okay, there's a need to kind of bridge that gap. And so both of us have also, since we've been working with the University of West Florida for a long time, of course, one of the big things that Pensacola is known for archaeologically, historically, is the 1559 Spanish settlement attempt of Pensacola, which makes it the oldest multi-year European settlement in what's not the continent of the United States. You got to put a lot of asterisks on it, right? We're not the oldest. There's some older ones, but we're pretty old, older than St. Augustine for sure. But kind of give you so we both have been working in different capacities. Nicole has did a lot of underwater archaeology on the shipwrecks when she was in grad school. I've had the opportunity to work in different capacities. Actually, the photographs that if someone wants to see the first photos that were taken when they announced the discovery of the land settlement site in 2015 were probably my photos. I was actually there. I took a lot of those photos. So it's my claim to fame. So, but I kind of give you a brief overview in case you're not too familiar. The Spanish, obviously, when they colonized North America, obviously, Christopher Columbus, 1492, makes this European discovery. It was already discovered. People were already living here for a long time, but that expedition sent really this huge wave of exploration across the Atlantic from Spain in particular, as well as Portugal, to the New World to try to explore it. So that's kind of the context. So in 1513, you have Juan Ponce de Leon that names Florida La Florida, which meant the land of flowers. It's a Catholic. They cited the land on a Catholic holiday, the holiday of flowers. And then also they saw a bunch of flowers. It was spring when they landed, so they said, "Oh, well, it's the land of flowers." So that's where Florida gets its name from. But Ponce de Leon. But then there were several other early expedition attempts. Now, most of these were known as entradas. These were military expeditions. They would send out, literally, these are armored conquistadors with weapons, and they're looking to see what's out there because they don't know what's out there. And they wanted to basically, with success that Hernán Cortés had in Mexico and Francisco Pizarro had in Peru, a lot of these early Florida expeditions thought they could replicate the success of all the riches and gold that ended up in Cortez's coffers and Pizarro's coffers, and they were hoping maybe there's gold in Florida. Spoiler alert, there wasn't, and they mostly died. So Narvaez, 4 guys survived that expedition out of the hundreds. Hernando de Soto dies. He's buried somewhere in the Mississippi River. So utter, pretty much failures. But part of the kind of contextualizing this is those early Spanish military expeditions did not leave the best impression for a lot of the indigenous people living throughout the southeastern United States, because they were focused on resource extraction, and that also included, in some cases, enslavement. And so that plays in later to where we get. At the same time, out in the southwest, there's Spanish are exploring, as the Hernando de Soto expedition is exploring the southeast. We know that they came through this area. They explored Pensacola Bay pretty thoroughly. But at the same time, Francisco Vasquez de Coronado was out in the southwest, and he has a captain of cavalry with him in 1540 out in the southwest, and his name was Don Tristan de Luna in 1540. So de Luna in 1540 almost 20 years before we get here, is out with Coronado. And so that's where he gets his experience, and that's why he's eventually chosen to lead a settlement attempt. So these early Spanish expeditions were not settlement attempts. They were just exploratory, basically. And so, but by 1559, the Spanish crowns are worried about the French finding the mouth of the Mississippi and encroaching on what they claim was Spanish lands for the crown. So they send an expedition from Veracruz, Mexico, in 1559 to Don Tristan de Luna y Mariano. He has 12 ships. One of the ships is at tow, so sometimes you read 11, but it's up to 12 if you count the ship that they were towing as part of that fleet. They leave Veracruz, Mexico with 1,500 people, 1 million pounds of supplies of food, women, children, livestock, literally brought Aztec warriors with them from Veracruz just in case they encountered some resistance from the indigenous population, and they made this settlement attempt. So it kind of gives you a little bit of that, so I went over this. So yeah, 450 soldiers, 240 horses, most of which actually died en route to the expedition. But we also know they brought a contingent of, I mentioned the Aztecs, but also African, both free people of color and enslaved people, although we don't know as much information about them, unfortunately. But so they leave in June of 1559. You can see the route they take. You know, they get like, what's going on here? You know, basically got blown off course and had to retack that. We got 12 ships, kind of hard to keep that together, especially when the winds are cooperating currents. So they get blown off course. Eventually, they sweep around. They probably make first landfall site, according to Dr. John Rook, who's like the expert on all this. So most of what I'm telling you is all coming from Dr. Rook's research. They probably cite landfall in the Panhandle around where the Bar Beach is at, where they get some water and get back on the ships, and they keep traveling. But unfortunately, they actually missed Pensacola. Their goal is to get to Ochuse, which is the name that the DeSoto expedition actually gave to our bay, Pensacola Bay. So in the 1550s, this was known as Ochuse, and that came from probably what the indigenous people were telling him it was called. But their plan was to come to Pensacola Bay because it was a naturally deep water port that they thought was very well protected. So you could get big ships, up in the bay system that would be protected from storms, anchor, and set up a settlement. That was the plan. They overshoot and they hit Mobile. And they get to Mobile, they go, whoops, we're in the wrong place. So then they turn around. Most of the horses have died at this point, so some of them get the horses off the ships, and then the horses go back to Pensacola. Ships turn around and they settle. In August 1559, they land in Pensacola Bay. All right, so this is Don Luis de Velasco. He's basically the governor of New Spain, the governor of Florida and Mexico, the guy in charge. And he's the one that's really in charge of this royally funded expedition by the Spanish crown, who they entrusted Luna to take care of. This is his description of Pensacola Bay. He says, it is one of the best ports that there is among what has been discovered in the Indies. The port is so secure that no one can do the ship any damage. Sometimes you should write things down. You say them, you don't write them down so people can't do it. Whatever he says. Well, after a month, the Luna expedition, the ships are here, they're offloading, they start building structures, probably temporary structures. 1,500 people, a lot of people to feed. They hadn't built a warehouse yet, so the safest place for the food was on the ships. So they left all the main food back on the ships. Makes sense. Problem is, when they landed, it was during hurricane season. And despite the governor's hope that it was a very well protected port, a hurricane strikes in September, and half the fleet is sunk, including all the food that they had brought with them. This is a problem because this was supposed to be a permanent settlement. What they wanted to do, the Spanish wanted to establish a foothold in Pensacola, where the port's at. Then they would connect it by a road to another settlement on the eastern seaboard, which eventually became St. Augustine. And that way, they could help resupply the fleets of ships and the mission systems that they were establishing from coast to coast. That was kind of why they were doing this. Hurricane hits, and they're like, oh no, we're in trouble. And so for the next couple years, it's holding on for survival. There's an expedition. Yes?
Do we know anything about that storm? Was it a direct strike? Was it like a west side strike? Or?
Yeah, we Dr. Worth's done a lot of research on that, so I can't say specifically. He might have something that says, I don't think so. I mean, the records that we have mostly come from after all of this, because it's a disaster. You know, people died in that storm. Luna kind of goes nuts. He starts arresting people. He starts threatening to kill people. The Aztec warriors are like, oh, we've had enough of this. None of the Native Americans around here that you're supposed to missionize want anything to do with you guys. Because as soon as they see the Spanish, they're like, nope, burn our crops and go north. That's what's happening. That's why there's very few interactions. It's because they remember what the Soto did 20 years before. Some of those people are still alive. And actually, some of the interpreters that Luna brought with him on this expedition were female indigenous women that had been captured, kidnapped during the De Soto expedition, and brought back to Veracruz and lived there for 20 years. And they brought them back as interpreters. Right, so the native population really didn't want much to do with the Spanish at this point in time. And so, yeah, so the documents we have come from the court cases when everybody started suing each other and blaming each other after that. So, yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. It was a powerful hurricane. Lots of people died. We don't know how many people died, but we know people died. And definitely the earthquake was something. So they hung on until about 1561, and the population gets smaller and smaller as they're evacuating. The Aztecs are like, get me out of here. The married soldiers, there's this amazing document of these married soldiers that are like, our wives are really tired of this, and so can we go home? And they send them home. You know, so, but eventually they pull out in 1561, they consider it, okay, we're not going to make it. And then the Spanishmen don't come back to Pensacola for 138 years, and instead they decide, hey, let's just set up a settlement on the eastern seaboard and forget this other idea. We'll do it on the other side, and that becomes St. Augustine, with Pedro Menendez in 1565. So a little bit of the archaeology and rediscovery of the shipwrecks and settlement sites. In 1992, the Florida Division of Historical Resources, under the underwater state archaeologist at the time, a guy named Dr. Roger Smith, who our book is actually dedicated to Dr. Roger Smith. He did the first survey, underwater survey of Pensacola Bay. At the time, the University of West Florida had just started doing some underwater archaeology a couple years before that. And so Dr. Bentz and the state archaeologists are going to do a survey of the bay. Well, the first thing they hit was they used a magnetometer, which is like an underwater metal detector. They got a big ping, and it turned out to be a big old anchor. And that big old anchor is sitting out right now in the Pensacola History Museum. And it turned out to be what they called the Emmanuel Point 1 shipwreck, which after some archaeology they conducted, they were able to prove that it was in fact one of the ships in Tristan da Luna's fleet, probably one of the frigates. And so in 2006, so we know there's 6 wrecks out there. One was blown on shore, and basically they picked it apart, probably scavenged every bit of it that they could to help build structures for the woods, pull the fastener nails out. Because again, they're kind of like, now they're a survival mode. But there should be a total of 6 out in the bay. So in 2006, they found another shipwreck. It's called Emmanuel Point 2 shipwreck. And then in 2015, the Luna land settlement site was discovered. That's one of the photos. So that happened in 2015. And then the next year, the 3rd shipwreck was discovered. And actually, there's people in this room who are related to some of the people that actually found the 3rd one. So yeah, well, former UWF graduate student. And so yeah, the archaeology has just been incredible over the years. And it's I mentioned that the reason why Nicole can't be here is because they're nominating it to be a National Register of Historic District, and it is, it's kind of a no-brainer that this should be recognized nationally, because not only is it America's first multi-year Spanish settlement in what's now the continental United States, but as far as I know, and I may be wrong, but so far no one's told me I'm wrong, so I'm going to keep saying it until I'm wrong. Is that it's probably the only archaeological site in the Americas where you have not only the archaeological component of the land settlement, the actual settlement, and the same ships that brought the people over. Right? Jamestown's been discovered and dug, but they don't have the ships. St. Augustine's been discovered and dug, the colonial component, the early one, but not the ships that brought the people with them. And that, archaeologically speaking, is very rare and an incredible opportunity to kind of compare the material culture that we know came off the ships and what you're finding from them. It's just an amazing opportunity to do this. So it's very significant just for that reason. Moving on. So the underwater archaeology, again, some of the things they find, this is Aztec pottery. That was kind of like, the only Spanish expedition that brought Aztec warriors with them in the 1500s was Luna. No other one did that. So finding this Aztec pottery, DeSoto, Narvaez, came from Spain. They supplied stuff to Spain directly. This is the only one that came from Mexico. So that's why you see this Mexican material culture come from it. This is one of my favorite ones. It's in the book. This is a ship, a carving of a frigate, like the silhouette of a frigate. And where they found it is really interesting. And it's actually where they found it and where we say that kind of lost or suggested that it's lost in the book is where they found it archaeologically within the shipwreck context. Little Easter egg for you history nerds. You know, olive jar, ceramics, you know, plates that people were literally eating off of, all the supplies that they brought, that 1 million pounds of food. You know, they had these big giant olive jars, so not only did it contain olive oil and olive wine, but also the bonza beans and chickpeas, right? They stored all that in these big jars. And they found these archaeologically underwater. The archaeological context underwater, the preservation is actually much better underwater than it is on land. And that's because all these ships that they've discovered were buried under several feet of sand. And that helps lock out oxygen, so the organisms that can normally eat away organic matter, things like shipwreck carvings, ship carvings, or soup, the bottoms of women's shoe soles, can survive in this context, whereas on land they usually don't. Olives, olive pits, right? So just incredible preservation. Oldest evidence of black rats in the United States comes from Pensacola. And they actually found the preservation is so good, they found the bones of these black rats. Black rats are featured prominently in our book. This is why we know they were there. This is really cool. This is like a multi-tool. They use this to, pick their earwax out of their ear or dig out the dirt from their fingernails. And this one actually has a whistle at the end of it. And when conservators at UWF, it's made out of ivory, when they blew on it, one of the conservators, it actually still made the whistle stop. This is Nicole's hand, holding America's oldest wooden spoon. It's the oldest evidence of black rat and spoon, and that's Nicole's hand. Her hand. She found it. It's kind of cool. Wish I found a spoon. Terrestrial site in 2015, they found a lot of similar materials, but obviously, because of terrestrial, things that happen on land, things typically aren't usually whole, but they found trade beads, glass trade beads. They did not bring on this expedition with them gold. That is not what they were doing here. What they were trying, you would bring stuff that you wanted to survive. It's like going to Mars and starting a colony in Mars. Are you going to bring like a whole bunch of chests of gold? No, it takes up room. You want food instead, things that are going to help you survive. But they did bring trade items because they thought maybe we could trade the indigenous people for food in case we run out. Well, it turns out if you mistreat people for a long time, maybe they don't want to help you, But they found trade beads. They found these are pieces of probably these little two things on the top are probably decorative pieces that go for rivets on like conquistador helmets or armor, bits of armor. These other bits were salvaged from the shipwreck and turned into maybe lead weights is one of the suggestions. So again, it's survival. Again, you can repurpose it. That's another olive jar fragment. Obviously, it's not whole like a big poppy solid that was found underwater. It's just a piece of it. Typically, those ones you find on land are more broken up and underwater stuff. Carrot-headed nails. I mentioned they had horses. These were probably tacks or horseshoes. They found these all over the site, so we know horses were there. Okay. All right. So lots of amazing stuff. We can kind of keep going and on and on. But again, like I mentioned, Nicole and I have always given talks about this over the years, and they're always finding really cool new stuff. But several years ago, we started a program. We had talked about, maybe we should do like a kid's book or something, about this. And then we started a program in 2017 called Archaeology Storytime. Basically, it's kind of like based on the library program where you read kids a story and you do like an activity and talk about it. Well, obviously, we were like, okay, let's find books about archaeology. Well, guess what? weren't that many that we thought were very good for our users, or that were written by actual historians and actual archaeologists. So we saw that there was a need to kind of fill this gap. And that is really where this inspiration came from to write this children's chapter, featuring a cat. Because what do kids love? Animals. I think. I have 2 kids, and they love animals. Right? So, why did we choose a cat? Well, a couple of years ago, when they were doing excavations on one of the shipwrecks, they found some more bones. And when they sent it off to the lab to do DNA and isotopic analysis to figure out what this animal was eating, where it was from, and it turned out to be the oldest evidence we have for a domesticated cat in what's now the continent of the United States. It was a ship's cat. So ships, during the age of sail, often had animals on board, and not just livestock. I mentioned the horses, but they had cows and pigs, rats. Why did they have rats? Because they had a bunch of food on, and so that's what the rats were eating. Well, how do you control the rat population? Ship's cats. So they had cats, probably companionship too, but they found the evidence for this cat. And so once we learned about that discovery, we're like, let's write a book from the perspective of this ship's cat and tell the actual history and archaeology through its perspective. And that's what we set out to do. All right, so we have so much information about it, right? And sometimes you get overwhelmed, like I probably just did to you all, just overwhelmed you with information. So you can't do that in a kid's story. And a lot of the books that we've read for this age group that have history, or maybe even some of them that do have archaeology, they focus again more on the process and not on the story. And really what will engage anybody, any age group, but especially children, is the story itself. The story structure itself is so critical in being able to tell. So we wanted to make up from the very beginning, when we started writing this book, we wanted to make sure that the structure of it focused on the story. The most important component of this book was not that we teach kids all the things they needed to know to become an archaeologist. That will come later if they want to do that. The most important thing was to tell the story and to get them interested. And hopefully, if you get people interested at a young age, and I've found this to be true for all the years I've been doing public archaeology, usually when I ask people a question in a room, like, when's the first time you got interested in history and archaeology? Almost every time they tell me, it's when they were young. It's like some memory they had when they were a younger kid that sparked a lifelong interest. And that's what we really want to set out to do this book. So how do we do that? Well, luckily, there is a game plan for all this. This book, if you're a writer, if you're trying to write a story, this is the one I recommend. It's called The Writer's Journey by Christopher Vogler. And basically, what he did in this book is he took this idea of the hero's journey structure that was actually developed by a guy who was a mythologist, a guy named Joseph Campbell, who studied myths across time and across continents that were not connected, that didn't have any communication with each other. And what he found is that on all these different stories, from Gilgamesh to Greek myths to African oral traditions and folklore, what he found is that there were similarities, that these stories followed a similar path for the heroes. And so he developed this idea of the hero's journey structure. And so Vogler, basically in this book, he kind of like builds upon that research and says, like, hey, if you want to tell a good story, this is how you do it. Has anybody ever seen Harry Potter movies or read the books? Guess what story structure J.K. Rowling uses? This one. Has anybody ever seen Star Wars? Guess what story structure is used? This one. Terminator? This one. It's all the same, right? It's all the same. And so basically, and then we'll kind of follow this through, but in our story, I'm not going to read the book to you, but we will kind of go to what happened. And in this story, it basically follows this cat named Luna. And so here we go. We start with the hero's journey. This is number one. Heroes are introduced in the ordinary world. So Luna starts out, he's a cat, he's a house cat. He's big, he's lazy, doesn't like to go outside, doesn't like to hunt mice, doesn't like to hunt birds. Just wants to sit at home and just chill with his family. So that's his ordinary world. He says, where too they receive the call to adventure. So what happens with Luna? Well, Luna's family all of a sudden starts packing stuff up. They're like, hey, we're going. Luna's like, I don't know where we're going. We're going somewhere, probably to Grandma's house on the weekend. But it turns out, no, you're not going to Grandma's house. You're getting on a ship. And you're going across this water. And we're going to a new home. You're leaving everything behind. And Luna, of course, is a homebody, so this sounds terrible. Doesn't want to do that. And also, Luna is terrified of water, right? He has this deep-seated fear of water, so doesn't want to do. So receives the call. 3, they are reluctant. He's reluctant at first, and then refuses the call. So Luna's like, nope, I'm not doing this. Runs away from the family. Family's like, loses Luna. They gotta get on the ship. Everybody's loaded. There's 12 ships. Luna decides, wait a minute, where'd my family go? Now I'm lost. Oh no, what do I do? Better get on the ship. Gets on the ship. Wrong ship. Well, family's on the other ship. Uh-oh. 4, they are encouraged. They are later encouraged by a mentor. So who does Luna meet in our ship? Well, he turns out to meet the ship's carpenter, who becomes his mentor. And there's another ship's captain. And the ship's carpenter and mentor begin to teach him skills that he never had. So what's his job on a ship? Hunt the rats. Never done that before, but there's another cat on the ship that helps him hunt the rats, right? So he's learning these new skills. From that point in the story, the ship lands in Pensacola Bay. They're now anchored. He's like, I'm not getting off this ship. Family's getting off the ship, probably. He's like, no, not going across that water. He's trying to get encouragement from his mentors. Come on, your family's over there, you can go. He's like, no, he'll come get me. I'm not going across that, I'm terrified. Month in, what happens? Well, cross the first threshold is number 5 and enter the special world. That special world is the hurricane strikes. Luna's actually flung, the ships are wrecked. He's injured. Encounters, then after that he encounters, the next one is they encounter test allies and enemies, which he all does in the story. He's injured, he's away, he's been blown way off from the settlement site, so he has no idea where he is. But he encounters a young girl, who's an indigenous girl, who also got blown up in a shipwreck, and or in a different wreck. So she takes him, she takes him back to the village to heal them. Next, we have in our story the approach of the inmost cave, crossing a second threshold. So she takes him to the village. We know that there was actually a village, a Native American village on the Escambia River that is from the same time period. They documented it. So in our story, she takes him to the village to get healed with these people. And then he gets another ordeal. And then that ordeal is, if he wants to get back to his family, he figures out that the family might still be there, and there's supply ships and relief ships coming back and forth, taking people out. And he's like, this is my opportunity. But in order to do that, there's only one way to get there, because the village doesn't want to send anybody down because they're reluctant to make any contact. So the only way Luna can get there is by getting in that water of the Escambia River, which eventually empties down into Pensacola Bay. And so he overcomes his fear of water and just does it, right? A deal. Then he's taking possession of the ward that's overcoming his fear. There's a roadblock back to the ordinary world, which kind of happens in that context. And then eventually there's this threshold. He returns home finally with this new outlook on life. He's been transformed, and that's what happens in the story. The story is not just about history and archaeology. That's all of it in the book that's in there, but it's also about overcoming fear. It's also about being young and experiencing new things and being open to those and learning new skills and just dealing with the world around us. So the heart of this story, again, the heart of this book is all about what makes stories interesting to people to begin with. And that's what we really kind of set out to accomplish with this book. I think that's pretty much it. So we do have social media, so we have Facebook. This is book 1. We have a whole series that are going to come out. This is a series of books. It's called Tales from the Trowel. So we're going to take this model that we've shown works with kids. It's been kind of incredible, the response locally that I hear, and I get emails and texts from people all the time. I had a kid who, this was the very first chapter, he was in fifth grade, the very first chapter book he read on his own was this book, and then when he had a class assignment 2 weeks later, what book would he make a movie into? He had read a report about it. He chose pretty cool, yeah. Story structure, right? It's like, so it's been incredible with the response. But this is just book one. The second book we're going to have is, we had to throw St. Augustine some love. So the next book is going to be the same kind of structure, right? It's going to be animal. We focus on their journey, but using real history and archaeology. And it's based on actual animal remains that they found. So the next one's actually about a donkey that helped to build Castillo San Marcos in St. Augustine. And I wrote that with Catherine Sims, who's the City of St. Augustine archaeologist. And so that's going to be a really fun book too. Hopefully that will be out in the fall. And that will probably have some illustrations. This one does not have illustrations, but in the second edition we might have illustrations. We're just kind of working some of that out. But yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions. Like I said, if you're interested in this book, you can buy it at some of the local museums here. Obviously, if you have a copy, you want me to sign it, I'll do that. You'll have to get I can forge Nicole's signature, or you can just get her signature. But she's got better handwriting. But yeah, I'm happy to answer questions. Yes, sir.
Mike, on the slide with the chronology, there was a map, an old map.
Old map.
Yeah, you just went, there was right at the beginning.
Yeah. There we go.
Yeah. Do you know what year or years that might?
I do not, off the top of my head. I know it's good. I don't know, Justin. Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. I have to. I'll give you my card and I can get back to you. I'm trying to see if I see a Chusei in there. Some of the, I mean, this like the Florida coastline looks like not too bad. It's like so it's probably a little bit later. So it goes early Florida maps. You're like, what is this? You know, like, what are they drawing there? What is this? Audio.
I feel like that's probably 17th century.
Probably, yes. It's probably a little later. Yeah. Yeah, there are some earlier maps. I think the earliest one we have in Pensacola Bay comes from like the late 1600s. There was an expedition before they came and established the Presidios. They wanted to check it out, and there's a map from that time period. But and there are some early 1500s maps, but like I said, these ones are nicer because you, especially with audiences that aren't as familiar with like the Florida coastline, they can kind of usually be like, oh yeah, that's Florida, I can see that. But the earlier maps, sometimes it's kind of hard to tell.
The reason I asked is I got an email from an antique book and map
Oh, cool.
place, and recently they have them for sale.
Oh,
And one of the maps, supposed to be a reputable outfit, was dated 1561,
oh, wow.
Spanish. And we come over to the area where Pensacola, the indentation looked like Pensacola Bay,
Oh, cool.
East Bay,
Oh, wow.
Escambia Bay.
Yeah,
It wasn't in detail,
yeah,
but it
yeah.
had those little,
Oh, that's very interesting. Yeah.
and
Yeah, I know Dr. Worth would probably love to see something like that. Yeah.
it was about 3,000.
We'll just get a picture of it. Yeah. Tell Dean to bolt, he'll buy it.
So they had really early maps.
Yeah, they've never found a map of the settlement site itself. And that's been, Dr. Worth has done a lot of, other researchers have done a lot of research for a long time. And so far, they have within the last few years found some documents that they hadn't seen before in the archives of Mexico. Mexico City has archives. The Spanish were great bureaucrats, so they made like 3 copies of everything. One copy goes to Spain, one goes to Cuba, one goes there. So that's why you have to kind of look in different places. But as far as I know, they have not found like a map of like, here's what the settlement looked like. So what they're finding archaeologically is going to be really important in terms of helping us understand the layout of the actual settlement. There would have been a church. Obviously, Luna would have had a house there. Aztecs being over there, so kind of teasing out the actual layout of the town is something that the archaeology been done so far has helped with. Jess?
According to Google,
Okay.
that map is by a French cartographer in 1650 and is the first printed map to show the Great Lakes.
Okay, this one. Look at that. Thanks. You're right.
Technology.
Technology, yes. Any other questions? Well, thanks for coming out and spending your lunch with me. Hopefully you're inspired.